This will sound absolutely implausible, even crazy, but in the United States, you don't need to show an identification when voting. I know it's hard to believe, right? Like it's a developed democracy, but one party, and as you know, we have two main parties, a few smaller ones, but two main ones. Well, one of the main parties. They stand their ground to the death. They just stand there, making sure that under no circumstances do you have to prove that you are who you say you are. You come in and say, I'm this person, prove it. But you must never do that. In fact, you can even complain if someone asks you to prove it. Oh, the horror! In California, that could get you in big trouble. You didn't believe someone? This is the only place where we're encouraged to take people at their word. On the plane, before the facade, they ask for your identification. At the bank, they ask for it. The notary, yes, before believing it's really you signing, says show your identification. For some reason, they won't just take your word. It's completely unclear why, but during voting, as a member of the Democratic Party of the United States claims, you're not allowed to ask for identification. It's even kind of forbidden. As I already said, in a number of states, it's forbidden to ask. So why do you want to ask me for my identification? It's forbidden here. It's interesting, right? The defenders say that the poor, the sick, and the dumb won't be able to vote. And honestly, I'm not so sure I want the dumb ones to vote. The dumb ones, those are the people who don't know how to get an identification, how to obtain it. But maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is an exaggerated problem. Well, here's what could happen. Or rather, what exactly has happened like that. What happens is that you have to ask for an identification with citizenship, demand that you provide it, and not trust the person who came to fulfill their civic duty. Friends, this is a huge problem. As it turned out, this is such a huge problem that solving it could cost the Democratic Party maybe a quarter or maybe even more votes in Congress and the Senate. This snag could lead to a split in the Democratic Party's business, which is already worth trillions today. And I'm sure it will lead to a change in United States policy, probably forever. So that's the little problem, not so small after all. This little thing could help change a huge number of laws, drain the Washington swamp, and shift things toward the free market, freedom, and a return to America's roots. Government dependency. They were all fathers there. There were no mothers. Not a single woman was present. By the way, thinking about it, Kiev isn't on that level. There wasn't a single black person, not a single Italian, not a single Jew, which is surprising, right? Yeah, well, it's surprising today. There definitely weren't any Muslims, and not a single transgender person, definitely none, and so on. The people who wrote, well, the Declaration and the Constitution of the United States of America were not poor white men of middle age. That's how I would put it. Well, those who believed in the Jewish God Jesus Christ, who, by the way, was also a Jew, and they took a lot of what they later brought in and applied it in the country. America, the United States of America, comes from Judeo-Christian teachings. Well, the authors, yes, the Sermon on the Mount, and Show from Nazareth. Back then, it never even occurred to them that someone could come to an election and cheat. Someone who called himself by the name of a dead person, the name was taken from a cemetery, from a tombstone, yes, and the accomplice of the fraudster used the name of a person who died 100 years ago. They never removed anyone from the voter list. Never, ever. There were about 234 and 70 per year DO. Wonderful, right? Something very interesting is happening in our democratic republic. We have Democrats fighting with the Republic, the Democratic Republic. Democrats fighting with the Republicans from the Republic. It's not just a fight for life, it's a fight for survival, and that's not just a figure of speech. But gentlemen, things are going to get even more interesting. Just wait for the first thing. Thousands of names of deceased people are being added to the lists and the ballots. A couple hundred hired Democratic Party operatives are put on a bus And in one day, they drive around on that bus. They go to a couple dozen polling stations where they use fake names and vote on behalf of these deceased pilgrims from the 18th century. So suddenly a polling station ends up with 1,000 or 2,000 votes appearing out of nowhere. A Democrat, a very specific Democrat, and if those who died found out they were being called Democrats, they would definitely be turning in their graves. And more than once in 2020, something strange happened. There were a lot of oddities, but this even caused a stir among the Democrats. In 2008, there was wild enthusiasm for Obama, the first black president. We're not racists. Hooray. There, 69.5 million people voted. And in 2012, 4 million fewer. Well, the enthusiasm dropped there. For Hillary Clinton, it was 65.8 the same, up to 65.9 from 58 million. To say the same people for Kamala Harris, I skipped Biden, I'll get back to him in a moment. And 75 million voted for Kamala Harris. That's 5 million more people than voted for Obama. That's already strange, right? Yes, there was wild enthusiasm back then, but with her, there's actually rejection. What about Kamala? Yeah, it's absurd, from my point of view. That just can't be. All right, listen here about Sleepy Joe, who lost the debates, never left his bunker, never spoke publicly. A terrible candidate, a terrible candidate. 8.13 million voters were ready to vote. For Obama, at the peak of his popularity, it was 69.5%. And for Biden, with absolutely no popularity, it was 81.3 million. These people didn't return to Mali. They disappeared. Where were they before that? There were 12 million fewer of them there. And where did they go after that? Where did they come from? First of all, in the fluctuating circles, the principle I mentioned is being discussed all over the country, as well as another one developed by the Democratic Party, meaning a project or a principle. And with the help of China, a scheme was carried out, a deception, a manipulation involving the sending of ballots printed in China, which were exact copies of American ballots. The paper, the fonts, everything was the same. Do you understand that this is possible to do? Yes, these were smuggled into the United States. A couple of such shipments were caught, but the rest, of course, were not. They were filled out by Democratic Party operatives, placed in drop boxes set up all over Democratic states, from where they were picked up by campaign staff and brought to the polling stations, as if they were legitimate, supposedly. Or when they urgently needed to forge a few thousand more ballots at night, there was no time, so they only marked the president. There are 203,040 other positions on those ballots, but the Democrats decided there was no time for that, so they just marked Biden, Biden, Biden. The rest, like Congress, Senate, or judges, they left blank. And then these ballots were taken straight to the polling stations, where they were brought in through the back doors and secretly dragged into the counting room. Sometimes to do this, they'd announce something like, let's say, a pipe burst, and everyone had to be urgently evacuated. They would select Republican Party observers for 2 or 3 hours, pretend to remove everyone, when in fact it was just to get rid of them, and then drag thousands of ballots into the stations while the Republican Party observers were gone. Where were they hanging out? Did they go home? Were they sitting in a cafe? I don't know. Maybe they were drinking. And during the audit, when did the audits happen? Well, how about we count them again, please? Let's count them one more time, and here they are, lying right here. The ballots were supposedly checked for legality, and now these supposedly verified legal ballots, let's count them, and we'll find out that Biden won, because now you can't really separate which of these supposedly legal ballots are actually legal and which aren't. They're here because they passed all the checks. Yes, I want to say right away that there isn't a single court decision, not a single one, that would have... There is proof of fraud in the elections in large quantities that could have influenced the results. That's why what Tulsi Gabbard is doing now is so important. unraveling and searching for all the hidden ends, and that's exactly why she's facing such massive attacks. Democrat. They are demanding her dismissal for a dozen different reasons, meaning that almost every day there's a new reason invented to fire Tulsi Gabbard. She will bring evidence, and with that evidence, everything will become clear. In general, so to speak, we already know. That's why there was a raid, but now it's been called off. The most well-known one was in Fulton County itself, and there were a few more raids there as well. So we already know some of the initial reactions to this. We understand that there was some pretty serious deception involved, but a Democratic attack. The situation is kind of a circus. At Pali, Czechia 1 year. Stanislawoliel Zawilianianich. It seemed that these last three he was, the authorities argued. This is the kind that Democrats hate, fear, and desperately try to stop. They're panic-stricken. This law requires voters to provide documentary proof of citizenship. What does that mean? Well, maybe a passport, right? If you don't have a passport, then 2 birth certificates, or it can be replaced by a naturalization document plus an identification with a photo. You can't just show a driver's license, which in California is given to anyone who breathes. In addition, the law requires cleaning up the list, meaning removing all duplicate entries, the same person with different addresses or different spellings of names and surnames. Something else, just to make it clear. 83% of Americans, not Democrats, not Republicans, but 83% of Americans, demand that voters prove they are citizens. But the Democratic Party stands firm, stands like a wall of total deception and disregard for the opinion of citizens, in other words, the voters. Who cares about the voters? Right now, they might lose their source of benefits. Many of the elected officials, if there are no, so to speak, if there are no forgeries, if there are no deceptions or manipulations, they will lose their very lucrative positions. Something funny, amusing, and surprising will happen very soon. I promise, or as my Georgian relatives say, I swear, I'm stunned, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just stunned. So, as they used to say in the south of the vast and mysterious homeland of elephants, I'm crazy about them. So, after 40 years of struggle, the Republicans succeeded on February 11, 2026. May this day be blessed. With a score of 208, 214 to 213, meaning all the Republicans plus 1 Democrat against all the other Democrats passed it. The American Rescue Act, this really is an act to save America if it passes in the Senate, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The lower house has passed the act to the Senate, where the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, the leader of the Democrats, the Senate leader, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, announced that he will block it and fight with all his might by attacking the right to vote. Interesting, just for your information. France, England, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland. I could go on for another half an hour. Exactly these countries. There they require mandatory proof that the voter is a citizen, so they are all attacking the right to vote, human rights, the country, and the rights of their own or other citizens. Absolutely wonderful, and they don't even think it could be any other way. There are two countries where there is no general population registration at all, so to speak, no such identification as it's called, meaning some kind of identification document. Yes, that's Australia and New Zealand, where presenting documents and citizenship is not required. In the rest of the world, if you believe the United States Democrats, the situation with human rights and voting rights is just terrible. Absolutely. Can you believe this nonsense? Can you believe this nonsense even for a second? Yeah, but do you think they themselves, the Democrats, do they believe it themselves? I'm not 100% sure about that. Write in the comments, maybe you are. In your opinion, do the Democrats really believe that requiring proof of citizenship to vote is an attack on voting rights? To pass a bill in the Senate, you need 60 votes, and until yesterday, the Republicans had 49, which is even one less than half. Several Republicans are clearly compromised with the Democrats and vote with them. But today, an important event happened. Senator Collins, a Republican, joined her Republican colleagues in demanding that this bill be passed. So now there are 50 votes on the side of common sense, plus the vice president makes 51. That's it. If 51 votes were needed, they would have won, but 60 are needed. So listen further. That's not enough to pass, but it gives Republicans the opportunity to say that the project isn't radical. A radical project works all over the world, but here it became radical. It's not radical, it's completely reasonable. Collins's support makes it possible to insert parts of this law into other bills that require 51 votes instead of 60. In other words, to push through most of this law piece by piece without making it a separate law. This is not yet getting rid of the vile and sneaky system that the Democrats are protecting, of course, but it's already a step in the right direction, and we're happy that this movement has started. And now, shock, we're talking about millions of illegal immigrants released into the country by Biden. We didn't realize the scale of bringing in these future Democratic Party voters who are freeloaders, and they really are freeloaders. Take a look at this chart. It's hard to believe these numbers, but it's true. In 4 years of Biden's administration, the Democrats brought into the United States 5% of Honduras's population, 6% of Haiti's population, 7% of Cuba's population, and 8% of Nicaragua's population. It was a mass relocation of countries into the United States where they were settled in districts with a Democratic majority but a declining population. Why there specifically, and why was the population declining? Americans are fleeing from states and districts governed by Democrats, where life is getting much worse and it's very noticeable. They're fleeing from Illinois, California, and New York. Where are they going? To Texas, Florida, and other Republican states. So it's better for them to live in Republican states. And that's why the Democrats have fewer and fewer people. But if the Democrats have fewer people, even if they're not citizens, just people, then they'll have fewer seats in Congress. And also, when a city or state is run by a Democrat, they easily let non-citizens vote and then give them IDs and let them vote at all, even if they don't understand a word of English. And they can't even fill out the ballots because of a sandwich. Well, they sell their birthright, and now it's just for a snack. Why do insurance companies support the Democratic Party and love what we call Obamacare? Now you're going to hear something, and then I'll explain.
And could you explain about the phantom people who are counted in these 24 million? We don't even believe there are 24 million, do we? Why?
The United States Congress. Virginia Fox is trying to understand why the government, under the Obamacare law, pays for 24 million supposedly poor people, and 12 million of them have never used a doctor's services, never bought any medicine, never even went to a pharmacy, never got any paid vaccinations. We are 24 million. We are the taxpayers. That's about $40 million a year.
So out of 24 million, it's quite alarming to realize that almost 12 million people last year didn't file a single medical claim, not even one. You can't tell me that these 12 million people didn't have any medical visits. These are people who are automatically insured on the exchanges, and they don't know that they have health insurance. That's why they didn't file a claim.
12 million people don't know that someone is paying for them and that they have health insurance. The government pays $1,400 a year for each person. For 12 million people, we transfer about $20 billion to insurance companies every year. $20 billion to insurance companies. Just like that, but as it turned out, not just like that. For some reason, the Democrats keep demanding to transfer more and more money. And then you start digging, and suddenly you find out that if you take one of the biggest companies there, United Health Group gave 82% of their contributions in 2024 to Kamala Harris, and only 18% to Trump. Well, just to make it look like they're being fair, they give something to him too, but all the other insurers also gave 5 times more to Harris than to Trump. 5 to 1. What does that mean? Does it mean that they make so much money, find and squeeze out so much cash when the Democrats are in power that they just don't care about our future, about complete prosperity, about America's well-being, and really about you and me, about everything, except when it comes to getting something for free? Getting $20 billion is just what we've found out. Just what we've seen on the surface.
They had medical expenses. But guess what? Those insurance companies that the Democrats are fighting for and trying to get those big subsidies for still got their subsidies, and the American people didn't get health care.
Health insurance companies are getting paid for 12 million people who have never filed a claim. That's right.
That's right. That was just in 2024.
So they're stealing at every step. In my opinion, Obamacare was actually created just to steal. Do you think the insurance companies don't give anyone kickbacks? Well, a police officer wouldn't last long at his post in gangster Russia if he didn't pay up the chain for the right to collect fines, and a good part of his earnings at that. Earnings that are stolen, fraudulent, criminal. It's the same in the Moscow traffic police and housing offices, really anywhere. But in the United States Congress, in the Senate, among governors and mayors, it's built differently. Of course, every country, every people, and every era has its own specifics, but the essence remains the same. Those who don't rob us don't climb up the ranks because they have nothing to pass up to their superiors. And then, of course, the bosses have no reason to promote someone who doesn't bring them anything. And for good deeds, too, from their point of view, you also have to give something. Like if you didn't give to the Democratic Party, you didn't get promoted. I don't know about the Republicans, but in our times it seems that it was the Democrats and the Democratic Party of the United States of America who stole, cheated, and acted as informers more, and they continue to do so. Why did it turn out this way? Well, historically, maybe yes. Maybe these ones gave bribes, these ones fought against bribes. Or some started taking bribes from some but not from others. I don't know why, but the point is that the Democrats are such a rotten organization that even if some Republicans are also corrupt, you still choose, well, at least today under Trump. Still, today under Trump, there's no feeling that the Make America Great Again movement, yes, Make America Great Again, that they are thieves, bandits, or swindlers. No, there's a feeling that finally people have risen up who actually care about tomorrow, about their children, and since they care about their children, they care about our children too. That's it, gentlemen, I'll finish here. I really hope you found what I talked about interesting. Please write to me. Let me know what you're interested in and tell me what you didn't find interesting. It helps me understand which topics are best to study and share with you. Goodbye.